will get to the method of teaching. He was pretty concerned about the two-phase sequence of learning, that you have the creative impulse first, and then you theorize and analyze. And you don't want to get those out of order. That at first you daydream and you don't criticize yourself. You just let it go, let the story go. Then after it's down on paper as a daydream, then you can analyze it and figure out how to structure it. So he said that a story is a structured daydream. That's what it is. And and if you, the writer's block, his argument comes from you're on the first part and you're already criticizing and analyzing. So you block yourself from creating anything. So you have to do it in order. In terms of teaching, he says the worst thing a book on screenwriting can do is install in the mind of the beginning writer a set of rules, regulations, formulas, prescriptions, and recipes. And that's an argument we have here. I mean, I have teachers that will start their introductory screenwriting class with a lecture on Save the Cat. And if they do that, that's your primacy effect is that's all they will know, because someone in authority told them this is it, and it's in print. So there you go. His argument was no. And the way he structured the curriculum was you start with task-based assignments, and then the analysis class would come later in the sequence. Initially, he said, don't read books on screenwriting or drama. There were no books on screenwriting anyway. He said, don't read books about it, read screenplays. And the assignments that we got in the class, which I'm actually still teaching, I'm in the middle of it now, they're task-based initially. Students have a problem to solve. Critique will include suggestions that can then be generalized with reference to theoretical ideas. I don't know everybody here's methodology, but so this may all be obvious, but this is what we would do. He didn't have these handouts, but he would have these assignments that were rather like, as he understood it, etudes in music, where you have to use your skills in observation, visual writing, before and after a date. No dialogue, just give us the props and actions and we should figure out what's going on. Create anticipation, that sort of thing. He was all about telling the truth about your lives. You begin character by study by profiling people you know. Who's the most ambitious person you know? Who's the most religious, the most conceited? And you would then put those, he would have these story patterns and say, okay, put that character in this situation and tell me what happens. These would be for short films. That would be the first part that would be written. And so you begin by exploring your universe, the student's universe, and then smuggle in the theory by way of task. Okay, this character is, most ambitious character you know is confronted by a problem that threatens everything they want. Okay, what are they going to do? And then what's the outcome? There's your 3 acts. And that's it. That's what you're given. So you have the character struggle with it. It was about telling the truth about life. A story is like a scientific experiment, discovery of a phenomena. Take a character, a known substance, put it in a controlled, preferably extreme circumstance, see how it reacts, how it changes, learn about a character in this way. That was his metaphor. Actually, simile, I guess that's method of teach. Screenplays are written backwards. It's important to get to the end of the first draft, then set up the moments. So fastest approach to the first draft is the best. Writers must allow the characters total freedom to do what they want to do. Actions are true to the character. Otherwise, they're just puppets. And this is an issue with, if you have he would say, a genre piece where you have to have certain things happen. The characters are just along to be plugged in. It's not as satisfying. It's just going back and using the method of looking at the story backwards. Since you know where the characters will arrive at the end, you can now put yourself in the position of a Greek god on Olympus who looks at them as they are starting their journey. What you see as a rule is that it's too easy. So you put obstacles in their way, take care of complications, and force them to find more inventive ways of coping with the situation. And you don't allow them to get too resilient until the resolution. As I mentioned, I did study with Frank in 5 workshop classes as opposed to the lecture analysis class. And so a few observations about his manner in the classroom. He had obviously the potential to be an intimidating figure because of his experience and authority, but he didn't use that aspect. He was a very supportive teacher. He was very much played the role of a collaborator. He, if you read something in the workshop and it didn't go well, you would get, the worst that he would do is say this: I think we are in trouble. Now, he didn't want to hear that in the classroom, but I will note that, when you are reading your work, you are in a very vulnerable position emotionally. You've made yourself vulnerable. He didn't say, I think you're in trouble, or you're in trouble. He brought himself into it. I think we are in trouble. And that meant we are going to solve this. So I think that sentence kind of summarizes his persona in the classroom. He said once to me his goal was to create an atmosphere in which students feel free to fall on their faces. And he said once that someone asked him why doesn't he really criticize the students, and he said that he told them that you don't criticize a toddler for having trouble walking. So in other words, they're learning, so you don't attack people when they're just starting out and learning. And he said this, once you are on the right track moving forward, you will realize that you will be learning all your life. There's no end to it. Learning is a process that never ends, which is kind of cool. So I have like a couple-minute clip of one of his lectures. If you just want to see the style of the lecture, I don't know where I got this. I deny knowing anything about it. It just appeared in my email one day. I I don't know how good the sound is going to be, so I tried to amp it up, but it was done with a high 8 or an 8mm video back in the day. But this is Frank talking about, it's in the introduction to Roman Holiday.
The 50s. Well, cast was performed, so we'll have no problem. I hope you will see the division into the sequences and acts, very clear in this case, because that is something that I would like to push behind us as soon as possible, because that is something that you can really work on your own, and it's not the most important thing. Because very often I get this impression that everybody wants to know how the sequences start and end, as if that was the secret of writing scripts. It's not. I mean, it is just a help to understand how the pieces fit together and how the material is divided naturally, because you deal with a conflict, you deal with a story, so it has to have those elements. In my writing class, we talked about it the other day, and when I was quite blunt about this problem, one of the students said, "But it's quite boring." And I said, yeah. Because it is something that has nothing to do with the actual writing. No, the excitement, the inspiration, the talent, and all those things show when you write. It's not how you divide it into parts. There is something that has to do with almost, I would say, scientific approach.
Okay, so yes, I'm working on my Czech accent to try to, so I can one day be as good as, try to be on his level, but it so far, no, as it were. So I guess I timed that pretty well, Romana. That's not too bad. 10 minutes left. So any questions that have come up during the course of our?
I have a comment, Paul.
Yes.
I really was glad to see Psycho in there in your graphics. Uh, Hitchcock was pretty much on record as saying all he ever did was consider the audience when he made films, and yet they were also made at a time that you earlier said nobody in classical Hollywood was really caring about three-act structure and Sid Field and all that stuff. So, did Hitchcock come up often in Frank's discussions, and is there any record of Hitchcock ever saying, this is how I'm hitting my beats in the story? I mean, I don't think there is. So I just, it's very interesting that because he really made his films audience centered.
Yeah, what Frank said about Hitchcock, yes, we analyzed, what did we do? I think he did Psycho for us, and then I think he did it for USC too. But so there's a record of it somewhere. But what he said was that Hitchcock was one of the few directors who could train his audience to watch his movies. And that another one was Fellini, who trained his audiences to watch what is a Fellini movie. When you're going to see a Hitchcock movie, you have some expectations. And Psycho would be a good example of that. That you go, well, actually, I think Rear Window is an even better example. There's like 40 minutes where there's not much going on at all, but you're okay because you know something's going to happen because it's a Hitchcock. In terms of Psycho, I remember reading, I think it was in his interview with Truffaut, that when it came to Psycho, he had to take his time with the cleanup of the bloody mess so that you transferred your emotional connection from the female lead to Norman Bates, so that it ultimately becomes his story. So that, yeah, Hitchcock is certainly aware of how to torture the audience. I think that's what got him excited. So yeah. The other thing I remember, we had a talk with Frank. Used to say that a movie's made before it's shot. It's made on paper. Of course, now we'd say it's made on PDF. But I got a chance to talk to the writer of Psycho maybe 20 years ago, and he said they went through this process of writing this piece, and then they had a last final meeting. It was all done, and they were meeting with the producer. They were waiting for the producer, and Hitchcock looked really depressed. And the writer got really upset, like, what is something wrong? And Hitchcock said, no, the movie's done. Now I got to go shoot it. All the excitement was in the creative process, collaborating with a writer on it. So,
Paul,
yes.
Thanks so much. That was fantastic and well timed. I was at the AFI library yesterday. They've turned the archivist onto your question, and it looks sort of promising about the Ford Foundation report. I think it's maybe in the archive there. So I'll report back to you.
Well, thank you. I think it'd be pretty interesting to see that, because I actually just did a chapter for the Paolo, the book on screenwriting pedagogy, and I tried to tackle the history of screenwriting pedagogy. What was the how did people learn about screenwriting before film schools? And I would be very interested to see what the state of affairs was in 1969. I know that when I was teaching at USC, there was one of the oldest writer there on faculty said when he joined in around 1970 or 75, that he was the only writer out of 50 faculty members. It was an afterthought. So yeah, I'm very interested to see what he came up with back then and how much has changed.
Yeah, I think they may have quite a bit on him, and they've just Sam Wasson and his teacher, they just did this big book using the AFI archives, so they've actually sort of rediscovered certain things. Anyway, I'm excited, so I'll let you know.
Well, I thank you very much for doing that, and that would be interesting, indeed. Anything else that we're wondering about? Do you guys find that is there a pattern to what the students are coming to you with? Uh, I I see it. I've got students in Europe as well as in America, and in in Sweden, I've done some workshops, and the students are all versed in the hero's journey. Like, stop. Yes, Romana.
Yes, I have precisely the same problem. I have always somebody coming up with, yes, so probably if I apply that, it will work. It's disaster because it never really work, especially for short films. Come on, I mean, it's not tailor-made for that. So yes, there are some theories that are very dominant, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, it gives your students a chance to break out because they can
That's the
study
goal.
I
That's the goal.
actually have to thank Blake Snyder for the most lucrative deal I ever got as a writer was on an animated feature where, I don't know if you know about these things, but the development process is such that they go through one story team after another, and I was called in to pitch to solve it because there were 5 writing teams before me, and they asked me to come in to solve their problem because they were stuck. And I went into the room, and on the whiteboard were all of Blake Snyder's beats. So they were using that as their guide, and they were stuck. So I was able to pitch a solution because I just came from a different background, and it involved dramatic irony. Instead of the bad guy being the bad guy and the good guy being the good guy, what if the bad guy is actually the boss of the good guys, and they don't know he's the bad guy? And he's leading the main character astray, and the audiences and they hadn't heard that. And I do think, in terms of pedagogy, my colleagues, I know people that will say, I will never show a student a film made before 2010, because otherwise it's irrelevant. And I feel like there was a peculiarity in the history of screenwriting pedagogy that the studio period was a unique flowering of it. I mean, there was Frank Capra called Max Sennett Studios Clown College. It was how you learn how to make movies. And all that knowledge, and they did a lot of them, is locked up there. And then because of peculiar circumstances of history, where the studios were closed, they closed the writing departments, the auteur theory came in. Frank even told me this is like 1980, he described it this way. He said, starting in the 60s, writers were like this group on the outside of everything that didn't have a place. And it wasn't until the 70s that people started to think, well, a movie needs to be written. And by then, people trained in the studio system were dead or retired. Some of them worked on in TV through the 70s, but that was it. And then you have Sid Field. So now you have this situation where a few books are dominating, but they're not based on studying the whole of cinema. They're based on, like Sid Field, 70. He was a reader in the 70s. So he based his theory based on that. And Vogler was a reader in the 80s. So he based it all on that. And Blake Snyder based it on navigating the spec market in the 90s. And now that becomes an echo chamber because movies that are based on that get made, and then people say, see, that's how you make it. And you can't break out of it unless you show them. And when I show Sunset Boulevard, the students are like, I didn't know they made movies about that kind of thing back then. They think it's all slapstick comedy or something. So it's worth looking at that. And Frank drew on those lessons from that period to talk about things, and so that was his education. Anyway, so
I just wanted to say, I think I'm drawn more to Frank's method. I think AFI is too. But I'm seeing something interesting because I teach around the world just as much as I'm here in LA at AFI. And something I've seen happening, I just saw it very clearly in a screenplay lab I've just finished in India, is for years, everyone's outside America generally was citing all the books, Save the Cat, whatever, and they were, if I was working with other people, and I did too, I listed them, on a reading list, but I actually am now seeing an aversion to this kind of book for many reasons, I think, but and particularly in India, we actually balanced it with as many Indian films or more,
Okay,
and,
yeah.
and actually a lot of writers on screenplay who were based in India. But I'm seeing less interest in that and less interest in following it, and actually more of a, I say, movement or more interest in what you've just described as Frank Daniel's philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah,
That bodes well for what we can watch.
yeah.
Um, I feel like, you know what Frank said in 1980, 81? He said, I remember there was a movie that was called Popeye that was really mediocre. Okay. And I remember I went with, hope nobody here wrote that, but no, but I went with a friend and we talked about it. Well, why do you think it's bad? And we concluded, well, maybe that kind of movie you need a collaborator, throw jokes around, stuff like that, because it really wasn't funny enough or whatever. And I mentioned that to Frank, my great theory, and he stopped me and he said, it was bad because screenwriting is a lost art. That's 1980. And sometimes I go to the movies nowadays and I say, yeah, still a lost art. But I have to say, the series that I'm seeing, you can't begin to follow all the series that are out there. It's impossible. But there's some really fine work going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quite sure why, but some of that, I don't know if people are familiar with Breaking Bad, but I think how he pulled together 66 hours of cinema at that level is comparable, I think, to what you see in the 40s in Hollywood in terms of the craft, and how he manages all the different characters, keeping them consistent over the course of 5 seasons and all the hours and managing audience attention. I finally realized how he did it. You know how? It was a miracle. That's it. That's all I know. Somehow they did it. It's amazing. So there is some really good stuff. I'm not crazy about the movies these days, but that might be I don't see enough. But that's my impression. So yeah.
All
Yes.
right. Do we have any other question or comments? Yes, Kira, please.
First of all, thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting, and I need to go back and reread your books and find out much more. One of the things that caught my attention were your comments about punctuation. And do you write? I need to go back again. Your books very much do a reread. Do you talk more about it in the books?
I don't think I ever used that term. That was more Frank Daniel's term.
Interesting.
But the tools I hope in that book are helpful in managing that, especially preparation, because you can, if I have time, but I think Toy Story is one of the big, great screenplays written last century, and you can see the use of preparation in the revelation of the antagonist, how he comes about, this elaborate setup before he shows up, the preparation by contrast. And through the magic of iMovie, I've re-edited it and cut all that out, and I show it to the students. It's just the plot is the same. A threat shows up to the main character's place in the social order, but it doesn't have any impact if you just do the plot. But if you create this anticipation and give the clues, and there's nothing, boy, it is something, oh my God, what is it? And they delay. Retardation is a term Frank used, and it comes from theater. Wait, make the audience wait, promise something, make them wait. And then finally you get this revelation that becomes a big deal. So my feeling is that preparation is important in that. And with student scripts, I'll give them no, you've got this twist coming, but you haven't really set it up. So what's the character expect is going to happen here? It turns out that the person is haunted by a ghost of a rock star from the past. Okay, what does she think is about to happen? How can you build up to that moment until it's a twist? And then it makes it a roller coaster ride rather than a tram ride. And my guess would be that's the main thing. But Frank, in one of his things, pointed to subplots also, which I don't do much of. But in the beginning, the students, if they can manage the plot, I'm happy. But subplot, you cut away from the main action, and then give the audience a chance a break from that so that you have a new thing developing, and then you go back to that, and then you leave us in suspense. So that does play a role. And you see that in series. There are the pattern of series like Insecure, that you're going to follow 3 major characters at least through the first season and what they're pursuing, and you cut back and forth between them. So that creates punctuation too.
Interesting. And you talk about the roller coaster, and I think there's something interesting about the speed of that roller coaster when it increases, and how we instinctively respond to that. So
right, when you go up when you go up, and you're going slowly, you have time to say, "Oh my God, who talked me into this?" And then that's I actually has nothing to do with cinema, but I have a system that you will never be afraid riding a roller coaster again. It's a mind game you can play. But if you like roller coasters, I won't tell you anything, because then you'll never be nervous again. But anyway, yes, that's the idea, to give us this, give us that ride, the emotional charge. And it works through contrast. I mean, the book that I did with Connie on science of screenwriting is why do we work with contrast? And it has to do with how we the neural adaptation or neural fatigue, where you're just, if something's at the same level all the time, you're gonna fall asleep. So you have to shift it around. And my students will have a whole movie written in interiors and say, "Will you break this up? Well, give us different light conditions." This awful thing that has creeped into things now is on the scene headings. They start using, I don't know where they get this, but they start using the word, instead of day, night, dawn, or dusk, which is visual, they use continuing, or worse yet, later. It's like, okay, I know it's later. You don't have to tell me it's later. It's not visual. But if you don't use light conditions, you're not using contrast, and you're not giving us a sense of what it looks like. I don't know where that comes from. So I try to work with them on that. And atmosphere, I mean, when you think about visual writing is, I think there's basically 4 tools, and Frank talked about all of them. You have he did. Actions is number 1. Characters doing stuff. He said you're not writing characters, you're writing roles. What does that mean? You have to write the character in a way that an actor can express what's going on inside through their actions. So you have to give them actions, and actions reveal who they are, actions and reactions. So you have actions, you have props, and he emphasized that. Can you use a prop? Look at how they're using props. You look at classical Hollywood, it's influence maybe of theater, but not even that. In the 20s, they had signs that said, say it with props, say it with actions, don't say it with title cards. So you have that, so use of props, and then atmosphere, you can control that as a writer, and then costumes, you can make reference to that. And you have those things. Again, in the classical period, Frank used the example of Ninotchka. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but this woman, Russian commissar in Paris, sees this ridiculous hat, fashionable hat, high fashion, 1939. How ridiculous. But she's lingering, looking at it. And then later in the movie, she when nobody's looking, she pulls it out of her drawer, puts it on. What's happening there? Something has changed inside and expressed through the costume. So that's what you can do with that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Yeah. I mean, to me, the big question. You were gonna say
no,
something.
Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting. I've found information about Frank Daniel via a couple of talks that he gave to some students at Columbia when he was leaving.
Yes.
And I put it on the student information here because it's a very good introduction to what you do.
So you said you already posted it? Because
I've got it. I found it online somewhere, but I post it for my students so they can read it because it's a very good introduction to the job of a screenwriter, really what you should be doing. But I think just as little tools, somebody wants something badly,
right?
They're struggling, blah, blah, blah. It's very simple, but a lot of students struggle to come up with a story. It's just things happening, incidents where there's no real connection. So when you start just think about what the character wants, and then therefore and but how you connect in the scenes, they're very. So I would like any more information. I would, and I think it's a shame he's not more well known, because I think everything else is very prescriptive, where he gives lots of nice little things to think about to apply to your story. So.
Right. Well, one of the things we're supposed to do as educators, at least at our school, that's in our mission, is to cultivate critical thinking. And that's what Frank was doing. Ask yourself, why is it working? Why is it working? How do you what is and explore it all your life? Whereas the popular formulas are they close you down, because you have to do that, and that's what it said. And by the way, the books are maybe the only way that some people can do it. It costs money to have a mentor like Frank. A book is cheap, so maybe it's better than nothing. It gives people a start. Put it down, but I think there are better books. I think David Howard's is still good. He said he can't do an updated version. Most of it is analyses, but the movies are from 1990 and before. But he said the estate of Edward Mabley, they're not letting him do another one. So, but the part I emphasize when I give students that book is the first 100 pages anyway, because that doesn't change.
Yeah.
So
thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome.
My students are very well versed in Paul Gulino.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I pretty much use the sequence approach and Linda Aronson as the core of how I teach, precisely because I want to try and get that kind of criticality going with the students and get them to think about to push beyond the conventional way of doing things, and kind of criticize the conventional way of doing things. But I was just wondering if you had any good tips on how to exercises or advice to give to students in order to help them develop the kind of audience-centered way of thinking.
That's interesting. How do you get them to audience oriented? Other than, I guess the exercises I mentioned are, it's just a process of let them tell the story, and then you jump in and try to help them see how they can manipulate an audience expectation, like on a specific basis. Obviously, the coolest thing, and what really helped, I think, in the studio days, was that they had an audience. They were making movies, one movie after another, and they were engaging audience attention. And writing students at least have the workshop, so that's good. The production students are like, I don't know what they do now. It's posted online. That's it. You don't get that sense of audience. But I think, that if I think of something, I'll let you know. But that's what occurs to me. I guess the way I would approach it, the way I do it with my students, is to get them to think in terms of the clues they're giving to the audience, the expectations that they can create, and how they can play with that. And curiously enough, the main notes that I tend to give nowadays are about people and character. I don't know how you guys are doing it, but it's like when you have a married couple that's been married for 20 years and they're discussing their daughter's bipolar thing, and they're talking like they haven't talked about this before. It's like, how long have they been married? What is it? And then it opens it up to, okay, think about the characters. What kind of a family system is it when the husband has waited this long to speak up to his wife about their daughter's situation? Then you can start to get them to think, to observe people. And curiously, I don't know how you guys are doing it, but we are recently merged our television writing with film writing, which makes sense. But in terms of teaching character, the TV writers, they say, they use the blaster approach. They say, oh, if you want the students to learn how to write a character, have them write a character from a TV show and see if they can do it, because they're not capable of doing it on their own. Let them have the training wheels or something else. And maybe that worked for old time TV, but it's obviously completely antithetical to Frank's approach, which was open your eyes, look at the world around you. And what was another thing he said? Find out how many secrets of storytelling lie inside you. In fact, he said, when I was talking, again, I was trying to get ahead of myself in over my skis or whatever. When I first started studying with him, he paused at one point. He said, it's a 2-year program. He said, you have 2 years to find out who you are. That's what the program is. So that's the way he was oriented.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so very much, Paul. Right now, I'm going to stop the recording. Okay, and we can continue talking. I will just stop the recording now.